I'm aroused. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Alien Familiar RPG podcast. I am Clayton.
My name's Kyle Perkins.
I'm Jordan.
And before we get started, you can find show notes and more at alienfamiliar.com.
Oh, yeah.
Email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com. We are on Facebook at facebook.com/alienfamiliar. And if you want to help us out with supporting the show,
oh, yeah,
you can be a patron at patreon.com/alienfamiliarmedia.
I'm uncomfortable.
I'm aroused.
That's why I'm uncomfortable.
How y'all doing? Welcome to the show. Wow, what a day to be alive and healthy. I feel wonderful. I just burned myself on this tea. Oh man. Yeah, how's that? It was pretty good. And so how many hit points did I lose? Okay, I tried.
So today we're not talking about anything real sexy. We're not talking about, we're going to be talking about the parts of the rules that never seem to quite simulate reality.
Yeah, we're going to be a bunch of goddamn downers. We're going to talk about all these shitty rules and these shitty games, and you're going to love it.
So we're negging people.
Yeah, basically.
Well, we're going to start with talking about hit points and any other systems that might in some way reflect the health and vitality of a character. Hit points are by far the most common. There are a few other systems that have some like damage track where you are just taking increased penalties on things depending on the type of damage you've taken, or you are well, I'm not really familiar with any other. I was thinking particularly of the Fate system for how they kind of track how you take damage in that system. Besides hit points, how else have you seen vitality tracked?
There's conditions on, like, what is the D20, is it Mutants and Masterminds?
Yeah.
Where there's no hit points, you just have a toughness, and then every attack sets a difficulty that you roll your toughness against, and if you fail, then you take another wound condition that gets progressively worse. And so, like, that number determines how tough you are, and everybody's got a set amount of wound conditions. I think it'll, like, I can't remember exactly the rules, but it'll like stack up if it's like way massive damage. You could take multiple conditions in one hit. It's been a while since I played that one though.
But I can see where depending on the way the conditions stack up, particularly I'm thinking of the way the Fate system, your penalties stack up, is it just becomes a bookkeeping nightmare of figuring out what exactly is wrong with you. And
it's real life.
Yeah. That's the main problem that I seem to have with hit point systems in general, and also the keeping track of health is just, it's so much bookkeeping. And it seems like hit points are there to make sure you're either good to go or you're down. Mm-hmm. And there's not really much
like there to determine how urgently do you all need healed. I'm the healer. Well, I'm at 20. I'm at 5. All right, we'll heal that guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've definitely fallen out of love with it over the years, and also like I think this should be a tightly coupled thing, but is either completely overlooked or a separate system. Is exhaustion.
Mm-hmm.
Like, not many people can go blow after blow in a stand-up fight with somebody for more than, 30 seconds before they get gassed out? I mean, the top fighting athletes in the world are, really struggling to stay on their feet after a matter of minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's not even taking into account like the actual physical damage that's happening. That's just the exertion that you're putting in.
Yeah, the only game I've ever seen that actually deals with that energy is what they called it, was the uni system. The unisystem that All Flesh Must Be Eaten was based on. They have two tracks they have a track for your vitality and they have a track for your energy.
Yeah.
And you have to rest in order to gain back energy. And if you are in a fight, energy runs down faster than your hit points most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And fighting isn't the only thing that spends your energy. Traveling spends your energy. If you are in a fight and you have to run, you probably aren't going to be able to because you've exhausted yourself so much in the fight.
Interesting. I've never played a game like that. I've never played a pen and paper game like that. That's kind of cool. That's such a common thing in video games, having to manage some kind of energy or stamina resource. But I've never played a pen and paper game like that.
But it's another thing you got to track.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
In addition to health, you got energy and you've got ammunition. You've got your food and your water.
What kinds of games is Unisystem designed for? Like what genres?
It's a generic system.
Okay.
I've seen All Flesh Must Be Eaten, a zombie apocalypse. They have I don't remember what it's called. It's some sort of you're playing a coven of witches, I want to say. It's some sort of magic system in it. Those are the only two that jump out at me. But it's generic enough that All Flesh Must Be Eaten itself has had many cross-genre splat books out for it, including wrestling.
Yeah.
Like professional wrestling?
Yes. Professional wrestling against zombies is a source book for this book.
Fuck, that's amazing.
That game is like GURPS for zombies specifically.
Yeah.
The old Deadlands system had wind as like a parallel bar for energy, but they only treated that like essentially subdual damage. Mm-hmm. Like it didn't really have anything to do with going round for round, as I recall. And then like the Star Wars D20 system, the revised one, that had a distinguishing thing between wound points that was just equal to your constitution, and then vitality, which could get really high. But you never spent those to do anything except like use force abilities and stuff. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. They're sort of gesturing at this problem, but I'd really like to see something cool. I hope there's a game system we don't know about out there that's done a good job doing that. 'Cause I think it's neat, and I like realistic game systems.
Mm-hmm. So we start with just one of the core attributes of your character is in a game is how healthy you are, how much you can do. Mm-hmm. And next we got like actually doing it. When shit goes down and everybody gets into a brawl, the way initiative tracks has always bothered the hell out of me. First round is fine. I'm fine with in the first round, like different people have a different point at which they're able to act, but beyond that, it's just chaos in a fight. Every tactician in the history of the world has said that like no plan survives first contact with the enemy, and the confusion, the disorientation of what all is going on. Whenever we're playing a game, all of our characters are perfectly aware of where everything is, what all is happening, where it is happening. Especially if you're on a grid, you can just look at the grid and see, okay, all of these things are going on. But in a combat, most of the time, I would think that theater of the mind would be the way to go, especially because it's so hard to conceptualize all of the different pieces that are going on in combat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if actual combat worked like that, well, let me rephrase. Like, SWAT teams or like Marine fire teams would lose their minds if they had that kind of like crisp tactical detail in real time of what's going on. You know, like there's never a friendly fire situation. There's never misidentifying your target or anything like that.
There's only friendly fire when your wizard is being a dick.
Yeah. Or in some games, if you roll a fumble or something, that's like a consequence of it. But it's never like I see some shadowy person over there and I think that's an enemy and blow their head off. And
That's
Tommy, no.
That's not to say that the rules don't allow for that, but it really seems like no players and DMs cause that to happen. Like, think about how betrayed and shitty your players would feel if you have everyone do a perception check and the highest is a 10 and you're like, yeah, you see something over there moving in the trees, and everyone looses a volley of arrows and they just killed some, like, treasured NPC, and the GM's like, well, sorry, your perception rolls weren't good enough. People would lose their minds.
It's fired without confirming your target.
Or you're in a fight and one player, if you're doing theater of the mind, one player isn't paying particular attention because they're on their phone and their turn comes up, and the storyteller or game master describes what they're seeing but doesn't identify who each person is, and you say, like, there's a figure here, there's a figure there, there's a figure doing this, there's a figure doing that.
Well, who seems to be the biggest threat?
Right.
The figure there has a pretty big sword.
It's dark, there's a lot of smoke. Okay, I shoot the big guy. Well, the big guy was your tank.
Yeah. This is kind of skipping ahead, but I think that it's relevant here. Another problem with the initiative is that every single turn is an insulated event. Mm-hmm. So, like, we're going to talk about full auto fire. If on my turn I spray 30 rounds into some guy across the room, then on your turn you can run up and hit him with an axe.
Yep.
But I should still be spraying bullets the whole fucking time, There's never a situation where, okay, you're laying down fire down this, this corridor, and some guy runs across and randomly gets nailed by your volley of bullets. Mm-hmm. That bothers me. That it's that Final Fantasy kind of fighting.
Right.
We put out that combat primer episode, right? We did some mock combat.
That was a few months ago.
It was to help me be a better DM. Help the listeners be a better DM.
I was thinking of something different. Yeah, you're right.
Anyway, that brings me back to that. Thinking about in 5e, all the ridiculous things you can do during your movement phase. Like, I'm running up, I'm drawing a sword, oh, there's a piece of gold in the ground, I'm gonna pick that up, I'm still moving, and stab. And then meanwhile, somebody spends their entire turn doing, like, a skill check, which would include some kind of like searching through, like, a room. I don't know.
There's wording in the PHP that I was reading the other day. There were the DM guide, I can't remember which, that kind of implied that you only get one of those list of move actions. I can't remember what exactly it said, but that was definitely the implication of it, was that you get one of these, and that makes a whole lot more sense than I'm running around doing every wacky little freebie thing I can think of.
Right.
But it's not spelled out as clearly as it should be, I think.
Well, I think it's pretty clear because of the implication.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another thing about initiative that bothers me is the fact that it takes my character the same amount of time to throw a quick punch as Jordan, your character, to swing this big fucking maul with two hands and do an entire swing. The only game that I've seen that tries to address this was, crap, I can't remember it. It was White Wolf, the Scion series, Hero, Demigod, God, where the initiative in that was kept on a clock. Yep. And your action determined how much time it would take for your next time on the clock to come up. So for instance, if you started at a 1 and did like a punch was pretty quick. So a punch only gave you, like, I'm just making this up, like, would only for your next action to come up.
So you got a cooldown for all your actions.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, they tried to kind of address that back in the day in 2nd edition D&D with weapon speed, but all that amounted to was a modifier to your initiative.
It still took 6 seconds for...
Yeah. But there were also attacks per round that you could have with weapons.
Yeah, like three attacks every 2 rounds.
Yeah. That's good fractions. God, this That's my favorite. 3 attacks every 2 rounds. Awesome.
Moving down the list of things you think of when you immediately, think about pen and paper RPGs, we had HP, initiative, grapple. I mean, really, we're not talking about the joke of first thing your players do, I grapple him. The first thing you have to learn in every system because it's overly complicated, how to grapple. But if you think about the actual mechanics, like right now, you spill my tea, and this is the only thing keeping me alive right now, and I'm pissed at you. And so I want to grab you, and it's not a hug. I want to kill and get you. There's so much at play right there. I have to get out of my chair. You start to get out of your chair because you see me coming for you. Can I close the distance to you before you pull out that knife that I know you keep? How do you actually simulate that?
Also, most, fighting, grappling situations is not one-sided. It's both are grappling each other, struggling for an advantage. It's very rare that, they'll, take somebody's back and it's, clearly just one person.
Yeah. I read a statistic several years ago. I don't remember where it came from, or read 2 statistics that were very closely linked. One of them, 90% of brawls go to the ground.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
80% of the time, the guy on top wins.
Oh, the guy on top on the ground. Whoever is above the
whoever's on top is up there just beating the shit out of who's on the bottom.
Now, by 5th edition D&D rules, since when you grab somebody, all it does is prevent them from moving, which is stupid. Does that mean that the person being grabbed can grab the grabber and both of them prevent each other from moving?
I think that's a separate roll.
Oh, wow, yeah. So in D&D 5e, opposed strength or athletics checks. Say I'm grabbing you. We roll, I win, I have you in a grapple. On your turn...
You can then drag me somewhere.
I can drag you somewhere, but that's all I can do to you. On your turn, all you can't do is move. You can do any other action, which would include a grapple attack on me, right?
I would think
so. Moving them is not the only thing you can do. If you have a weapon in your other hand, like your hand, you can still beat them with...
Oh, sorry, right. The only, abnormal thing I can do to you. Because attacks that I do against a grappled opponent, it's just a standard attack. I get no advantage on that attack, I believe. But yeah, would that mean that you could grapple me even though I've grappled you?
I don't see why not.
I guess that's actually something I was about to say before you brought that up, is that in a grappling fight, in any kind of brawl, especially one that's kind of gone to the ground, I try for that first grapple. We're already in extremely close quarters. You're probably going to try to pin or grapple me. And I'm trying to think of any systems. Apocalyptia did this, maybe still does. If you have somebody grappled, can't you fail so severely that then you are now grabbed? Or
they can turn it around on you, yeah.
There was some rule, some mechanic for that.
Yeah, because it's more like you're struggling over who's in control of the situation rather than just, I've got this status effect on you that you're trying to, prevent. And there's, a bunch of sub things that you can do, like turn that basic grab into a choke or, whatever. Turn them into a human shield, that sort of stuff. But I think that there needs to be some distinction between just the reaching out with one hand and grabbing someone to prevent them from being able to effectively defend themselves as you're coming at them with a punch or a knife or whatever. That's the whole reason you do that, to keep them from being able to get away. Versus bear hug, tackle, get them in some kind of wrestling scenario.
Or it needs to be a wrestle check.
Yeah, it's just a completely different set of things. You're doing it for completely different reasons. The grab in D&D doesn't make it any easier for you to stab the person that you have grabbed.
Right.
Or for your teammates too, either.
Yeah.
For that matter.
If you could trip them, and then because they're held, they can't move, they can't use their movement to get up.
Right.
You would have advantage on them. But that would be...
But there's none of that, prison cell stabbing where you walk up and grab somebody's shoulder and then run it into their guts a bunch of times,
What are the mechanics on that real quick? So if I have an enemy grappled, and then some other thing brings that character prone, that would indicate that they could not use their move to stand up, since they can't move?
I would need to look this up in a rule book.
At some point you get to the pinned condition.
Yeah.
So there are some stages of it, but my God, how many fucking rounds are you having to spend going through all this mess just to get this situation that, in all reality, we could be in 2 seconds flat, you know?
How long do most professional, like, Olympic wrestling matches last? I mean...
I don't actually know the answer to that.
It's not more than 3 D&D rounds.
I would love to see a simulation of a police arrest using D&D grapple rules. and it has to come up. The town guard comes and wants to arrest somebody.
There's manacles in the player's handbook.
I'm not talking about manacles. I'm talking about putting an arm behind someone's back and, pinning them down to the ground. Like, that would be so ridiculous to watch happen in D&D rules as written. It would just be... Arrests would be nearly impossible.
Well, yeah, because all you have to do is roll a really, really good charisma check or a diplomacy or something to just talk your way out of it. Right?
Interesting segue.
Thank you. I just killed a guard. A guard saw me do it. And this is obviously depending on the game master. But another guard runs up to me. Stop, citizen. I implore you to reconsider. Go, citizen. That's what we're talking about here.
What are we talking about here, Kyle?
Charisma-based skill checks. And how ridiculous and unrealistic they are, Jordan.
They are indeed.
And most of the time when you're trying to convince someone to do something for you, you're not actually in real life convincing somebody that what you're saying is truth or what you're saying is fact. You're just wearing them down to the point where it's more beneficial for them to stop listening to you and do it than to continue arguing.
Yeah, you're looking for compliance, not agreement. We've talked about this before a few times, but yeah, like the whole breadth and multi-dimensionality of social interaction is just so much more complicated than I think you could ever reasonably simulate with some numbers. Arguably, it's more complicated than the physics of actual combat.
Mm-hmm. And it's certainly something more complex than what can be conveyed in 6 seconds.
Yeah.
I want my diplomacy checks, my persuasion checks, my intimidation checks outside of combat to all take place over the span of minutes or hours or possibly even days.
Yeah, I mean, it can take a long time to really change somebody's mind about something or run a long con or whatever, I mean, because that's the thing about a lot of this stuff. It's subtle and you can't move somebody quickly a large number of steps from where they are. You've got to walk them, overcome all the built-in resistance to, admitting that their own position is wrong or, maybe not even admitting, but just being convinced that it is.
Takes a long time to turn a person from hostile to helpful.
Yeah. That guy who would meet with KKK members, and he was a black guy who would meet with KKK members and eventually, over the course of years, maybe, convince them to, quit the organization. He did this successfully with a handful of people, which is extremely impressive. D&D, what do you think? DC 26? Roll it. You got it.
And even in systems where social combat, which is kind of what we're talking about, is its own subsystem, like Vampire. Typically, social combat is its own special rules, special combat system. Still there, like whenever you're verbally sparring with someone, most of the time you're just beating them down verbally until they're done talking, until they don't have anything else to say. Mm-hmm. And you have enough power that you can end the conversation there. Mm-hmm. And that's always a temporary thing. Mm-hmm. But in like most games where you manage to totally dominate someone verbally, that's going to become the status quo of their condition. Is they've got this condition now where they've been completely convinced of you, rather than like they're going to sit there stewing over all the things you said to them and come up with all the comebacks that they're going to say next time, and they're going to be an even more difficult opponent the next time.
Or maybe, readjust some of the points that they made.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's always necessarily that people stick straight to their guns. It depends on how, invested they are in the thing. But over the course of several conversations, assuming that everything is happening, in good faith and is well reasoned, and the people aren't like deeply psychologically locked onto their points, I think people tend to kind of reach an average between each other's positions, assuming that they were both orbiting true positions to begin with. You know what I mean?
Yeah. My experience is that there's always this hard barrier of a person's way of thinking and belief structure, if that's what you're talking about, where that there has to be a degree of overcoming that before that change happens. That's just something I don't ever really see in role-playing games.
Yeah.
Even getting someone to come to the negotiating table to even begin this social battle is a difficult task.
Mm-hmm.
That's never really represented.
And also, like, not just with negotiation and stuff, lying specifically has always been one of those social things in role-playing games that has always bothered me, because it's extremely easy to lie to people depending on what's going on. I could go out and meet somebody right now and say, "Hi, my name's Kevin," and just keep a straight face, and they have no reason to believe that I'm lying.
That is why I loved lying in Night's Black Agents. There was no lying skill. It was, you are using this other ability that you have. You are using your military knowledge. You are using your law enforcement knowledge. You're using your knowledge of the bureaucracy. You're using your knowledge of chemistry. Whatever knowledge you are using to fabricate these lies, it's founded on you having to know something about the thing you're lying about.
Yep.
What was the way of detecting a lie in Night's Black Agents?
I don't remember the ability.
Bullshit detector. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bullshit
Literally called bullshit detector, which is great. Yeah, that is something that I think I've never been able to quite put my finger on why that bugs me. Deception versus insight. What is it in World of Darkness? The detection of a...
Well, subterfuge is the skill you use to lie. I don't know if you use that to detect.
Let's see.
I think it's one of those combos.
It's not empathy, is it?
It's like wits plus something, I believe. Regardless, I've taken 4 shits today. What do you think, lie or truth?
It's pretty early. I'm going to go with lie.
That was the truth, actually. I've taken 4 shits today, Jordan.
Wow.
Yeah, beer shits.
I see. Yeah.
But it's lying is easy. Lying is fucking easy.
Especially when it's a complete stranger. I think it's much harder to lie to somebody that you know.
Most of the lying in role-playing games, you're lying to complete strangers, too.
And especially if you're playing a game where it's before the information age, where there's pictures of everyone that you can find, like when the only way to get a picture is to have someone sit down, look at you, and draw a picture of you.
Yeah.
In the real world, crimes went unsolved daily because you had to have an eyewitness who was there, and eyewitnesses are wrong 50% of the time when they are absolutely convinced that they are right. They are wrong 50% of the time.
Yeah, you could commit a spree of crimes in a town and go one town over and completely change your look, and no one would ever know.
Yep.
The good old days.
To be an old-timey drifter.
A vagabond.
You could sit there, and you could try to convince someone of something until they die of old age, and they might not be convinced. And,
dude,
speaking of dying of old age, what, Jordan?
That's thin.
Segway master. That's a good one, though. Dying of old age. We got healing spells. We got the ability to cure disease by touching somebody the right way.
Good touch, not bad touch.
Yeah. But that's just hand-waved away. You know, every race has a lifespan in Dungeons & Dragons, in other RPGs that have, you know, some kind of, like, even if it's not magic, some kind of immediate heal ability. That, I guess, again, it's DM specific, but doesn't work to save someone from dying of old age or cancer. Can you use a paladin ability to cure cancer?
Cure disease.
Maybe, but the cancer is usually your own cells. Diseases in this context are generally thought to be outside the body type things. I don't know if a paladin's ability to lay on hands could cure that or any autoimmune disease.
Yeah, do we want to get into the germ theory of D&D?
Might be a separate topic, actually.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk about that as a separate topic.
This goes back to the health and vitality thing in a lot of ways. Like, what is damage? What does it mean to take damage, right? Like, is it just a laceration on your body? Or, no, clearly it's not just that. There's lots of other things that cause damage. There is, you know, spells that are some kind of, like, they're at least skinned as being disease related in some way. There's necrotic damage and shit like that, right? But you're telling me the old age is not necrotic damage? I'm not so sure.
Back in the day, certain spells would take a certain number of years off your life.
Oh yeah,
the caster.
The real high level ones?
Yeah.
Like Wish and stuff?
Yeah, Wish, you gain a D10 years. For an elf, so that's like a couple of months to us. To a human, 10 years?
Yeah. We've got a bunch of like half-formed thoughts I'm trying to stitch together around health and old age. And
speaking of stitching things together, you think about healing itself when it does work. You know, I've had massive, severe trauma to my left arm from getting hit with a spiked maul. And obviously it's magic, and that is in its own right kind of an answer. It's magic. It works. But you think about trying to do like a medicine check or something that isn't magic related. And the mechanics of it, it's just kind of you roll, it happens. There's no recovery. There's no physical therapy. Obviously that would be boring as hell in a game. This is a game, but...
Well, most games don't have a non-magical healing ability that you can do to a person to gain back hit points that isn't just convalescence. There have been a couple of them that have had some sort of, like D&D 4th edition had, where you could second wind and stuff like that.
Fighters still have second wind in 5th edition.
Okay. I've never played a fighter.
Yep.
But what about the way fighters use weapons?
Oh, wait. I remember what it was now.
Cut out that segue.
Hang on. Another thing kind of to do with old age and also to do with health. Permanent damage from taking severe wounds. You know? Like, tell me how as like a 12th level grizzled old fighter I'm gonna have a limp from, you know, taking a broadsword to the thigh when I was, you know, a much younger man. That, not there. Bone dislocations, you know, fucking shit healing wrong, like nerve damage. There's a million things that real people in combat suffer with for years.
And all of that, and even without combat, all of that stuff just kind of plays into the old age. Your joints are just getting used. The cartilage is just getting ground away. It's weird that all of this wonderful magic exists, but nobody thought to start applying some of this magic to fixing that sort of thing. When in the real world, that's where a lot of people are hoping that the real money in healthcare is going to be.
Oh yeah. Well, that was one of the things I was trying to think of earlier when we were talking about disease. I was watching a thing about how some of these places that are looking at like age reversal or age slowing kind of therapies sometimes have a hard time getting funding because the CDC does not classify aging as a disease. But if they would, that would open them up to a bunch of grants and shit like that. So like, it's kind of arbitrary, like what thing we're calling a disease or not. But if there was some, some bacteria infection that you could get that did all of the effects of aging, but a little faster, we definitely call that a disease,
or some some chromosomal problem that causes you to physically have a body that is many decades older than what you actually are. Progeria.
Oh yeah.
You don't see those kids around on the news and stuff as much as you did back in the 80s and 90s.
It's funny, we've spent so much time and, energy being able to fix and cure just about anything at this point. Obviously, that's not completely true, but you think about the amount of things we can cure and fix, and now we are looking at slowing down or reversing aging in some small capacity. It's beginning, and no one has done that. I guess the magical CDC doesn't fund aging research either, maybe, and that's why there's no magic there. I don't know.
It's all like Silicon Valley startups and stuff. That's where this money's coming from. But like, literally, aging is just damage to cells. It's damage to the telomere at the end of your chromosomes. With every splitting, you lose little bits of this information, and so every copy is worse. And so, cure light wounds should cure your fucking telomeres,
Well, let's talk about the things that cause those wounds. Those light wounds.
Good one.
Let's talk about weapons for a little bit. I have a lot of beef with the way weapons are handled in role-playing games.
Where do you want to begin, Clayton?
I don't know, because I've got so many weapons-related things up here. Let's just start with weapon breakage, equipment breakage, which never happens unless there is a rule for it, in which it happens way too much. I've never seen a good balance. I played a D&D game where whenever you rolled a 1, your weapon broke. I was playing a fighter with 3 attacks per round. I was breaking a weapon on average every 3rd or 4th round of combat. I would have to go through, hack for a couple of rounds, hope somebody went down so that when my weapon broke, I could pick up their weapon. If they didn't go down, then I had to go into a grapple, wrestle their weapon, and use their weapon against them.
That's pretty badass.
It's a little bit awesome.
It sounds like fucking Last of Us.
Yeah.
Shields are a big one for me on that. I can sit there with my shield board, and you can hack away at me with a 2-handed axe indefinitely. I kind of have often thought that shield should probably just be a big block of temporary hit points that you have to roll something to use to soak damage rather than just a invincible barrier.
I was always partial of using the rules for using shields being more of a parry, where it's a lot easier because the sword the shield is a lot bigger than any weapon you would be using to parry with, but it would still take the same core mechanic that you would use to parry a blow.
I wonder how often weapons actually broke in medieval combat, because thinking of long swords from the 1300s or something. It seems like that would be a lot harder to break than a rapier or a small straight sword, those sort of 15th, 16th century style of weapons. If they're only being crossed by weapons of roughly the same size, which is historically what tended to happen most of the time, it's flexible steel that has been, it's been built for strength. So,
well, in the real world, weapon breakage was such a big problem that's why we kept evolving and changing the metals and alloys that we were using to make our weapons up until now, and we are continuing to do so. Like, especially before even iron weapons became, like, iron being not really all that, like, being comparatively strong compared to everything else, like, bronze weapons would bend like crazy. And like, the 300 Spartans at the Thermopylae Pass, that's the main advantage that they had, was because they had stronger weapons. They had weapons made out of actual iron rather than a lot of they had spears that had a tip of iron, and I want to say that the shaft was also metal as well, so they weren't going to break against the softer metals that the Persians were using. So, yeah, weapons really did break all the time. That's why we got better steel.
So that was kind of weapon stamina gave them an advantage, because even though the enemy soldiers might still be in fighting condition, their weapons weren't. Interesting.
I wonder, though, like, if you've got two guys fighting and they've both got, long swords, the same kind of make, how long they could battle with each other before one of those swords would break. And I feel like breaking seems really unlikely. It'd be much more likely that because of some, geometry of some situation that you get in, that it would bend out of shape and then be, shitty and basically useless. But I see what you're saying about two different materials, or even two different weapon types. I could see somebody who's using like an axe versus, a spear or something. You catch that spear just right and you're going to break it with that axe.
Or a sword versus an axe. You catch the axe in the right spot, you cut the handle.
Let's talk about armor.
Part of what I hate about the way armor is done is just that every armor is anachronistic to the time period in which it's happening, or in which the story is supposedly happening. Like, you'll have armors that have spanned human history, all available at the same time in a particular location. You will have scaled mail and like full plate, like a breastplate, where the breastplate in every way was superior. Why would you ever have the scale mail? Because in reality, the scale mail would actually be more expensive to make, because it's going to take a lot more time in order to make each individual piece, put the pieces together.
And like weapon breakage, armor never wears down. I could come up on a mounted or an armored knight in full plate mail, like a two-handed maul, catch him square in the breastplate. In real life, that would crush that in most likely, and assuming that he doesn't die immediately, he would be unable to breathe for the duration until he gets that armor off. No such luck.
Or worse, like leather armor, where you cut into leather armor. Well, now you've got cut open leather armor. You can't fix that. The leather isn't going to heal itself.
Yeah, in most campaigns, the players never visit armor smiths unless they're buying better armor.
Yep.
And that's not just D&D. Any kind of game. You want to go shopping? Yeah. Because you need all your shit repaired after a week of travel in the field? What? No, I want to buy something better.
How are there still armor smiths in D&D? Like, it seems like there should be so much legacy armor from ages past that never got destroyed. It should just be armor merchants. Also, like, they used to have this in 2nd edition, and it was too crunchy to keep up with. But having different weapons having advantage or disadvantage over different types of armor. Using piercing weapons against chainmail.
Or bludgeoning weapons against chainmail.
Yeah. Not really such a thing anymore.
Nor is just having piecemeal armor. Like, who in the real world, point me to more than a handful of examples of really rich people who had a full set of one type of armor that they were wearing that wasn't piecemeal in some way. That they didn't just cobble together either because they couldn't afford to buy it all at once, and so they bought the breast piece. They bought the shoulder piece, then they bought the arm piece, And it's all going to look different. It's probably all going to be, each piece is going to be made by a different blacksmith, so it's going to have a different style to it.
And the tarnish on the older pieces, too. Those chainmail dice bags that you made and are still selling for $50 each. Listeners, you were saying that, like, the different ring production rates that you were, when you were making metal rings, they would begin to tarnish from the moment you started handling them and using them. And so some of the early dice bags had, like, half of the rings are at a different rate of tarnish than the other half. And that would make, even a chainmail, a chain shirt not look like this uniform idea we have in our minds of chainmail looking.
Mm-hmm. And most of the discoloration is just due to the fact that I had to use different runs of steel in order to make those rings. Oh. It wasn't the same batch of steel. It wasn't from the same, I bought them in big long coils, the steel, and made the rings out of that. Well, when I ran out of one, I had to buy another coil, and while we have incredibly precise machines designed to ensure that each product is within the same tolerance of all the other products, they're still going to come out different colors. Mm-hmm. There's going to be slight differences in the sheen of the metal, and that's what you're seeing whenever if you get one of my dice bags and some of the rings seem to be a little bit more faded than the other. It might be because those rings are older by maybe a couple of months because I bought the rings earlier, or it might be a very slightly different process used to make those rings, even though it was from the same manufacturer.
That's one of the very basic level things people think about with fantasy role-playing games are the players running around in, it might not be ornate, but it's going to be uniform, let's face it, pretty cool-looking armor. Mm-hmm. Every player, whether it's a leather up to full plate, every player's in really cool matching armor. Highly unrealistic. Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering, though, about, I'm interested a lot in this idea of, gear degradation and stuff like that, and, cobbling together stuff. And I tried to simulate that in Apocalyptia. You can do all these things that we were talking about for this gear stuff, but it's so much more bookkeeping. I can't think of a way to simulate that faithfully without it being this object has some hit points to it, and you got to keep track of that stuff, and blah blah blah. So when you take damage, you have to not only figure out your damage, but the damage that your armor is taking, and you want it to be quick because that's another way that games are never simulating reality. You spend an hour on 10 seconds of in-game time. I don't know. Do you guys have any better ideas on how you could possibly do that kind of thing? I really don't know.
Gear degradation or time simulation?
Gear degradation that is kept up with elegantly enough that you don't spend 5 minutes on your turn of 6 seconds or whatever it is.
It's a dumbass idea. You have a paper doll or even just a single piece of paper that is the armor you're wearing, and it's with your character sheet, and every time you take damage, you have to tear a little piece off of a grid off of that thing, and when the whole thing is gone, your armor breaks. I actually kind of like that, but
I actually like that idea too. If it's a chest piece, you have a representation that resembles a chest piece, and you can take pieces off of it, but once you've eaten through it, not even necessarily torn all apart, try to represent where the damage has been taken, take a little piece off of it there until it wouldn't be functional anymore until you've torn it in half or something like that.
In this hypothetical game, for people who hate waste, we could sell, armor paper dolls, that's air quote paper doll, that once they're torn apart, they could be like Velcroed or like magneted or somehow, put back together to be reused as another representation of your armor in its state of decay.
Okay, so you guys' elegant idea is voodoo dolls.
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Cool.
So legitimately, my idea is have a printout that is like of a body, and whatever armor you've got on, there is a pictorial representation of that armor with like a grid on it.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever you get hit, like you tell somebody, okay, fill in a square on that grid. And whenever so much of the grid is full, then that's when the armor breaks.
Mm.
Okay, so you're talking about linear degradation in the form of just hash marks on the grid versus like I took X amount of damage, Y amount is done to my armor, and because that was a big hit, it does a lot of damage to my armor versus a small hit that just kind of nicks it.
After the podcast, I want to draw a picture of what I mean.
Okay, cool.
But riffing on that for a second, you could have weapons that deal extra damage, they're armor penetrating or something, and instead of one linear hash mark checked off because you've been hit, it does two, or something like that. But anyway, we can talk more about this after this episode because we've strayed.
Well, if we're talking about armor, what about daggers versus plate mail?
This is my pet peeve, because historically, knights don't get killed with big fucking swords. They get killed by little daggers that everybody carries around with them, and the way you kill a knight in a medieval battlefield is you get enough people to knock them down and pile on top of him while somebody is there taking out their knife and shoving it into the creases in the armor. Knights were never killed with great swords. I'm sure there has been a few cases, but the majority of the time it was a dagger that killed the knights. How many times have you fought in a D&D game with a dagger against somebody in full plate? Because a dagger only does 1d4 damage. When you could have a sword that does 2d6.
Only as a rogue.
Or at low levels, or when your other weapon is gone for some reason.
When it broke.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever seen a group in D&D group grapple the bad guy and just pin them to the ground while one motherfucker just That would be awesome.
Well, how are we going to represent that grappling?
Man, that could be really effective. A bunch of like specced out wrestler fighter guys, and then just one rogue that's just ready to assassinate.
I also want to talk about the way that guns are represented in games, in contrast with the way bows are represented. In any game I've seen, you are better off using a bow for your weapon instead of a gun until you get to guns that are approximately equivalent to the end of the Civil War and later, where you've got cartridge ammunition and you've got the ability to fire multiple rounds in succession without having to reload. In real life, there is a reason why bows went out of fashion way before the end of the Civil War. Guns are so much easier to use and to learn how to use as opposed to a bow where you literally have to train for a large part of your life in order to get your body to the point where you can accurately use a bow. In medieval society, Sundays after church is when the people in town would get together and they would practice shooting their bows. Mm-hmm. That's what they did every week. That's how the English longbowmen became the dominant force on the battlefield in the late medieval period and early Renaissance. But guns were so much better because you could just put them in the hands of anybody, and after an afternoon of teaching them how to reload, they could pick it up and fire it, do it again, much more accurately in a group, just as accurately as a group of archers.
And the gun also delivers so much more energy on target than, the bow does. I mean, the gun is what made plate mail obsolete.
Yeah.
And there's that weird period of history in like the 1600s when like the battlefield was basically like mounted knight dudes, yeah, but also dudes with pikes, and behind them dudes with little single shot shitty guns and or maybe crossbows, and that was pretty much it. Like once you get that formation, mounted knight in plate mail looks ridiculous, and it never came back.
Yep.
Guns are also easier to maintain.
Yeah.
If you keep a gun fairly dry, you keep it from rusting, maybe a little bit of lubrication if you really want to. Even, we're talking shitty old guns to modern day, assault rifles. That gun's going to be able to be used for decades. Hell, like I've fired a gun that's 100 years old, but a bow, the string is going to, even if it's not used and it's kept away carefully, that bowstring, I don't know how long they last, but a bowstring will degrade. The wood itself will begin to degrade if it's not taken care of.
And that's why there are so few yew trees in the British Isles, is because they cut all those trees down to make their bows. Or is it the ash?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Me?
You. I would like to say a little bit more about just basic combat mechanics stuff. So like sword fighting, we kind of got into this a little bit when we were talking about how most fights go to the ground. If you've got two people that are wailing on each other with swords, for one thing, I don't know of a system that does like a lock very good. That's a common thing in media, and it would be a thing if you're trying to struggle to get this blade into somebody's body and they've got one to repel with. It's always just like these slashes back and forth is always how it's portrayed. But for one thing, if you're swinging a huge piece of metal at someone, and even if they do manage to get their sword in the way, there's a shitload of kinetic energy that still needs to be dealt with. And if your footing is not right, you're going to get knocked over, even if you don't get cut.
And your sword's going to get knocked into you.
Yeah. You don't see a lot of that.
You also don't see, like, you only see, like, for a sword, the blade being used. You don't see any other parts of the sword being used. And every medieval treatise on sword fighting, you are using the pommel, you're using the guards, you're gripping the knights are gripping the blade with their gauntleted hand in order to get leverage and
left-handing.
Yeah.
You do see pistol whipping represented in a lot of systems, but you don't see like a pommel hit represented.
And it's also always assumed that, like, furthermore on what you're saying, that not only is the attack just the blade of the weapon, your attack is also just that weapon. There's never like slash at the sword and then kick him in the chest, something like that. There's, little shoulder just to knock him off balance. Like there's all these little details of
it goes back
hand-to-hand combat.
And it goes back to the fights going to the ground. You're not maneuvering in order to get a good slice. You're maneuvering to knock them to the ground so you can run them through.
Yeah. I mean, Musashi talks about this in Book of Five Rings. He talks about how when you're moving in on your opponent, that your main intention is to cut into them as deeply as you can, but you also have to keep all of these other options available to you to kick them, to knock them down, to punch them. Like he talks about your whole body being part of your attack with every attack. It's not just like he actually makes fun of fighters who just sit there and slash at each other. He's like, this guy's an asshole, That's another example of how initiative also sucks. Is that in real life samurai duels, both guys died most of the time. In a D&D samurai duel, they're gonna roll initiative. One guy's gonna go first. He's gonna make an attack that's not gonna kill the guy. The other guy's going to attack back, and they're going to sit there and hack away at each other until one drops and the other one walks away victorious. Sorry. It's not real.
And the survivor just walks away with all of these bleeding wounds that magically heal on their own.
Yeah, he'll get better. Don't worry about it.
No danger of actually bleeding out when you're walking away from the fight.
Well, we're going to get a lot of people probably send in systems where any of the things we've mentioned are actually handled well. Stuff we've never heard of. Please do.
I'd love to steal it for my game.
Also, remember that the point of this episode was to shred apart a lot of these things. We fully understand that if the things we talked about were represented perfectly realistically, these capital G games we're playing probably wouldn't be much fun. But I think it's a pretty cool exercise to talk about this, especially when you're thinking of elegance in a design.
Yeah, I can't remember the system, but there is a Wild West high noon gunfight role playing game where the rounds are in fractions of a second.
Oh, nice.
For doing a quick draw and shooting your opponent.
Damn.
What do you do on this round? I spend my fraction of a second spinning my long gun.
I'll say a syllable.
Heh. Next round. A. Next round. Tuh. Next round. Ill. Next round. Grim.
You've gotta make your roll to grab your weapon. You've gotta make a roll to elegantly pull it out of the holster without it catching. You gotta bring it up. You gotta line it up. You gotta squeeze the trigger without,
I love the failure opportunities on those first two actions.
Yeah. Fail and blow off your own toe. So do we want to move on to geek things?
Sure.
I don't really have a whole lot. I've discovered 2 YouTube channels that I've been getting a big kick out of. One of them is called The Modern Rogue. They look at a lot of... one of them is very obviously a D&D player because he has an everyday bag that he assembles with all these cool, probably illegal in some areas, like things that you can have. Like they show how to pick locks and defeat different systems. They talk about an episode they talked about the UHF, VHF radio system in the U.S. and who is authorized to use it, who isn't. There's just a lot of really fringe information on things that are on the fringe of being legal or illegal.
Nice.
I don't think just purely a set of lockpicks is illegal anywhere, though it might, cause someone to investigate you and you could get in more trouble for other things. But I've flown with lockpicks and, going through a security scanner, no one says anything.
There are
a pretty handsome white guy, so... Yeah.
It depends on the state. In Ohio, you actually need to prove that you're not going to be doing a crime with them. If you're caught with, if your vehicle is searched and they are found, you need to be able to prove that you're not going to commit a crime with them because the police already had probable cause to search your vehicle.
How do you prove that?
So much for innocent until proven guilty.
Interesting. Well, I'm wrong.
That needs to be taken to court. That's bullshit.
But your picks aren't going to be found in. Well, they shouldn't be doing just a random search.
Shouldn't.
Stop and frisk. I have one brief point of pride. Finally beat Persona 3 after 3 years. I had 150 hours in that JRPG.
Jesus.
Holy shit. But I did one of those things where I basically kicked the shit out of the game and did everything I'd ever want to do in it, including the optional boss fight with the Reaper. And I probably will never play it again.
I was about to ask when you were done, did you eject the disc and snap it over your knee? Because that'd be sick.
No, I already took that game and bent it over my knee. I don't need to break my disc. Felt good, though. I hadn't played a game like that and beat it in a long time.
My geek thing, I got 2 of them. They're both YouTube channels. Clayton and I recently went to go see Alien in the theater for the 40th anniversary, original Alien, and I found these 2 YouTube channels. One is called Alien Anthology. That one is a series of short films that are surprisingly high production quality, all set in the Alien universe. Some pretty cool stuff there. The other one is called Alien Theory, and that is a fan channel where a guy goes through and just breaks down all of these, very detailed bits of the movies and the comics. We'll go into a deep explanation of how the pulse rifle works, or, go into some alternate theory that is, maybe kind of implied in different parts of the movies about this or that. Lots of stuff about the alien biology and life cycle and yada, yada, yada. But yeah, if you're a big alien nerd, check those out because they're pretty sweet.
That might be the geekiest geek thing we've ever brought up, and I love it.
Thank you.
All right, guys, what do you say we stop this bullshit and start rolling some dice?
This has been a production of Alien Familiar Media. You can find past episodes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com. This production is protected under a Creative Commons non-commercial attribution, no derivatives license. Music for this episode is Suburban Outlaw by Forget the Whale and can be found at freemusicarchive.org.